got a countdown?
Ties to it.
I'm just watching the clock.
It's just televised too.
It's supposed to be, I think.
It's not just the slides.
Somebody's taking this up.
Just in case it was
This is the slide deck, so we have to turn around. That's the letter.
Okay, we're live.
This is government.
Good afternoon. I am Mark Safario, the Interim American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, ARRA, coordinator for the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. I'm a little nervous this afternoon, so if I stutter and stammer a little bit, well, don't take that down in your notes. Today, the Coordinating Board will be presenting information to assist institutions and agencies that are recipients of federal ARRA State Fiscal Stabilization Fund, specifically Government Services Fund, and I'll refer to that from now on as GSF, which was awarded to the state by the U.S. Department of Education. Other CB staff that will participate in today's webinar include Dr. Arturo Alonso, Deputy Commissioner for Business and Finance, Chief Operating Officer, Dan Weaver, Assistant Commissioner for Business and Support Services, Susan Corrine, Deputy Assistant Commissioner for Business and Support Services, Gary Johnston, Deputy Assistant Commissioner for Planning and Accountability, and we also have Susan Warren, an audit partner with the firm KPMG. And, we have Rob Coleman from the Comptroller's Office. Sorry, Rob. The Government Services Fund, GSF, and other ARRA funds were appropriated by the Texas Legislature as a part of the state budget, specifically outlined in Article 12 of SB 1 for the 2010-2011 biennium, and reflect the decisions of the Governor and the Legislature in allocating federal ARRA funds to state entities. The Governor's Office was designated as the prime recipient of the GSF in the Notice of Award issued by the U.S. Department of Education. The Governor's Office has designated the Coordinating Board to manage and implement all administrative and fiscal responsibilities under the Act. As such, the CB is ultimately responsible for the reporting of all GSF data required by Section 1512 of the Recovery Act. The CB will be the only reporting entity for this 1512 report. All GSF recipients will be required to report information directly to the Coordinating Board. The Coordinating Board will collect all required data from all recipients, consolidate the activities and expenditures into one Section 1512 report, and submit the report quarterly at federalrecovery.gov. The CB will follow and comply with all specified state reporting requirements outlined in Article 12 of the General Appropriations Act, as well as specific federal oversight, regulation, and reporting requirements as defined by ARRA. The first Section 1512 report is due no later than October 10th for the quarter ending September 30th. No government services funds will be awarded or expended by recipients prior to September 30th, so the first report will report zero expenditures for the quarter. The Coordinating Board has developed an ARRA web page on the agency's website, www.thecb.state.tx.us, at a link appropriately entitled in bold white letters, ARRA. The CB will continually update the ARRA web page to provide guidance, documents, and reports related to the GSF administered by the agency. We will also have a FAQ, frequently asked questions section, on our web page in response to your questions. Today's webinar will be archived and also posted on the ARRA web page. The Coordinating Board also has an ARRA email address, arra@thecb.state.tx.us, which is shown on slide 2 and also appears on the ARRA web page. We have received a number of questions to date and have updated the information to be presented today to answer these questions. If you have a question during the webinar, email it to us immediately. You do not have to wait until the end. We will address all questions during the question and answer portion of today's webinar, including any from the audience that's here at the coordinating board. If we cannot answer a question, we will research it and post it on our FAQ on the ARRA website, on the ARRA webpage, within 1 week. After today, we will continue to monitor the ARRA mailbox and post new material in the FAQ section on the webpage. Today's webinar agenda will take us through the process that the CB has planned and developed to address the state and federal responsibilities and requirements of managing, tracking, and reporting all ARRA GSF activities and expenditures. Slide 2 will list the topics to be discussed, an overview of the GSF, the application process, funding of awards and program management, reporting requirements, and monitoring and audit activities. Slide 3 displays the overall categories of funds to be awarded from the GSF, which total $723,165,683. Included in that total, there is an allocation to the Texas Education Agency for 2010 textbooks for $361,592,500. Formula funding allocations are made to the general academic institutions for $81 million, to the health-related institutions for $51 million, and to the community colleges for $15 million. The coordinating board is allocated $80 million for incentive funding. Also, in Section 25, there are specific allocations detailed for special projects, which total $111,407,500. In addition, the $723 million also has $10 million appropriated to the governor's office for compliance cost, and $13,165,683 to the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality for the Texas Emissions Reduction Plan. The Coordinating Board ARRA webpage has a quick reference breakdown of all GSF funds by agency or institution, including formula funding, incentive funding, and special projects, with a total for each for each institution of higher education or state agency for all categories. So if you go on our webpage and you click on that quick reference, you will see a breakdown, and you will see where your institution is awarded funding and the total award. The IHEs normally receive all formula funding in Article 3, funded by state general revenue. The relatively small percentage of your total formula funding appropriation for the 2010-2011 biennium that comes through Article 12 is financed by ARRA federal funding, not state general revenue, and as such carry with it not only the state reporting requirements but also federal regulation and requirements as defined by ARRA. The Coordinating Board's administrative responsibility and the information and guidance discussed during this webinar is for the ARRA GSF only. Institutions are individually responsible for all applicable federal and state regulations and reporting requirements for any other ARRA grant or direct funds awarded by any federal agency. We are just talking about the Governmental Services Fund today, and that's all. Finally, that's redundant, one very important point. In memos emailed to the institutions of higher education and state agencies dated September 15th and September 17th, which was addressed to chancellors, presidents, and CFOs at the institutions of higher education and the commissioners or executive directors of the state agencies, we asked for each entity to provide a single point of contact for the Governmental Services Fund. The coordinating board will use this person to communicate important news and developments related to the GSF to all recipients. If you have not already done so, please send this information to Mary Lou Guerra at marylou.guerra@thecb.state.tx.us.
Or the ARRA office.
Or you can also send it to the ARRA office. Thank you, Dan. Okay, our next presenter will be Dan Weaver.
Thank you, Mark, for setting such a high bar for the rest of us for this presentation. I think Mark didn't have to watch the football games this weekend, so he worked on getting a script down just right. So, thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm going to talk through just the next couple of slides, talking about the application process and talk about the funding and general program management. And I think from a perspective standpoint, it's imperative and critical from the coordinating board perspective is to make sure that we get it right out of the gate. And the way that we've gone about trying to determine what it is to mean to get it right is we've gone all the way back to the end in the reporting and the fiscal part that's going to come at the end of the presentation to make sure that we've taken every step up to that point that we need to take to make sure that you, the higher education entities and the state agencies, we're all dovetailed in the process that we're getting ready to embark on. I liken it to the old days in the space program when before they launched the crew, they made sure that the crew was going to be able to get back. So we're going to make sure that everybody gets back at the end. And the way that we're going to make sure that we accomplish that is to make sure that we launch at the appropriate time. So having said that, I'm going to go through a couple of slides on the application process. The applications are going to be made available on October the 1st, which is Thursday this week. One of the reasons that we've done this is to make sure and to assure the fact that we haven't issued, there's no illusion of issuing any awards prior to the end of this quarter, September the 30th. The applications will be available on the ARRA website, at the coordinating board's website. We've established a 30-day application period. So each entity that's part of the GSF fund will have 30 days to submit an application. And we're also setting a 30-day review period, so essentially a November 30th deadline for all the reviews of the applications to be accomplished. So by December the 1st, we expect to have all of the GSF funds applied for and reviewed and hopefully awards made. There should be one application submitted for each GSF amount. So if you have incentive funding or you have formula funding or you have a special project, it's acceptable to put all of those funding amounts in one application. We're going to review the applications for compliance with state law, with ARRA compliance, because it's, as Mark has pointed out already, this is not general revenue anymore, they are ARRA funds. We'll make a notice of a grant award will be sent to each applicant after the review period is completed. There's been many questions asked over the last week about the plans that have been submitted to the governor's office and the LBB that were due on Wednesday, if those were sufficient to act as an application. The answer is that they are not sufficient, that you're going to have to complete an application. It would certainly be more than helpful if you would be so kind as to attach your application to the Governor LBB to make sure that we're providing consistent reporting and consistent project information. But to repeat, that the LBB Governor report is not going to be sufficient for your application in order to get the funds. The application process for all GSF projects will follow the same pathway. As Mark has already lined out, we're trying to treat every component of the GSF fund exactly the same way. Again, we want to make sure that we get it right, and we want to make sure that we're consistent through the process. Next slide, please. The funding and the program management will follow established federal practices. Many of you are frequent and large recipients of federal grants. We are trying to make this process to fit exactly into the same kind of framework that you're currently using. The ARRA grants will be cost reimbursable, which means that you're going to spend your funds, but you're not going to be able to get reimbursement for those funds until after the notice of grant award goes out to your institution or to the state agency. Allowable expenses will be reimbursed on a monthly basis, and we are coordinating those with the reporting periods that exist from a federal level. Gary will talk a little bit further about the reporting in subsequent slides. The coordinating board will follow prompt payment guidelines. I'm not sure I need to expound on that at all. And I think probably the most critical point on this slide is that we know that there are going to be issues that are going to come up. We are going to work through each one of those issues as expediently as possible. We have a dedicated staff of individuals that have already worked very hard to get us to this point. We're going to make sure that we get all your questions answered. I would refer you back to that link on our website frequently, as we'll be updating that, I would suspect, on a daily basis, either with FAQs or with any other questions that might come in that might be beneficial to the state as a whole. And with that, I'll turn it over to Gary Johnstone.
Thank you, Dan. I'd like to talk about the reporting requirements. The coordinating board, has been said, is the responsible administrator of the government services funds, and we are also designated to be the agency that will be reporting to the federal government on the 1512 report, which is a quarterly report of expenditures, jobs created, project descriptions, giving the federal government the information that they're going to need to report on the progress of using the government services funds. The reporting that you'll be submitting to the coordinating board will become a part of the quarterly report and will be made public, as has been announced by the Department of Education and the Recovery Board. There will be a public site that will report all information submitted on 1512 reports. In addition to collecting data for the Office of Management and Budget that's required by ARRA, we're also going to be including information that we're collecting from you that we hope that will be available to meet the requirements of the other state agencies that will be following the expenditure of these funds. So we're hoping that will serve as a multiple purpose data collection. However, most of the recipients, with the exception of the community colleges, have been notified that they will need to report to the Comptroller of Public Accounts the information on a weekly basis, and they will also be asking for copies of the quarterly reports. The data that we're collecting really falls into two categories. One is what I'm calling a static data element, something that you'll be reporting to us one time, and it will not change, should not change during the entire award period. In addition, you're going to be reporting to us on a monthly basis data that will have to be that will change each month. As Dan said, we will be having these reports on a monthly basis as you request reimbursement of your costs, and we're going to be asking for those grant recipients to submit their reports by the 5th. Two reasons for that early deadline. One is that at the end of each quarter, the coordinating board will need to report by the 10th of the month following the quarter. So we want to have we want to have our information from you on the 5th so that we can make the deadline of the 10th that has been set by the Office of Management and Budget. Next slide. These are some of the static elements that you'll be required to report. You'll be given an award number by the coordinating board. We will also need each institution to, if you do not have a DUNS number, to obtain a DUNS number. And you will also need to register with the CCR, which is the Central Contract Reporting Site for the federal government. You also have the option of giving us a recipient account number, which we will refer to in our communications with you if that is something you wish to provide us. In addition, we will need each institution and agency to give us the recipient congressional district number, state representative district number, and state senate district number. The coordinating board will be providing you with the award amount for your reports. Let me get into some of the data elements that you'll be reporting to us that will be changing as you expend these funds. The first one is that we will need the total number and amount of subawards that you make to individuals. Let me clarify what individuals. Individuals is not your payroll. It's not your employees. The individuals would be a subaward that you would make to a entity that is not considered a vendor. It's not for a good or services, but it would be for the benefit of the individual. I've had one question about whether or not students would be considered a subaward to an individual, and that is, I do not have that answer at this time, but we will get that answer for you. So if you are planning on using some of these funds for financial aid, we'll need to clarify for you whether or not subawards to students will need to be counted. We will need to know each month the total number and the amount of payments that you have made to vendors less than $25,000 cumulative amount. And that will be a consolidated number, and later I'll explain what's needed for payments for vendors over $25,000. Each month you'll need to give us an estimate of the completion status of your project that you're funding with these funds. And that will be a simple percentage, whether you're 25%, 50%, or up until when you're report to us that you're 100% complete on the project. We will need to know the number of jobs that were created or retained as a result of using government services funds. And there will be some requirements for documentation of this report. So if you are setting your budget, and I'll give this as an example because it was one that was given at one of the OMB webinars. If you're creating your budget for your board, and you identify in that budget that as a result of receiving these funds, you are able to retain 4 jobs that would have not been retained if you had not received these funds. That would be adequate documentation for reporting these jobs. The same would be the case for creating jobs. If you can document in your budgeting process that these jobs were created as a result of receiving these funds, that documentation needs to be maintained for audit purposes later. One of the things that has come up, since these are federal jobs or federal salaries, for money used for salaries out of a federal purpose, as to whether or not time and effort reports would be required. We understand that question has been submitted, and we are waiting an answer on what are the requirements for time and effort reporting for federal expenditure of funds. So one of the things you need to think, we would like for you to think about is whether or not you'll have, as you receive your award, whether you have in place a way of obtaining time and effort reports from your employees. Each month we will need to have a description of the activities that you have accomplished this month in using those funds, and then lastly we'll need to know the amount of funds that you have expended. Next slide. The next slide talks about infrastructure funding, and we understand that infrastructure funding as defined here means any construction project. So if you use these funds for construction projects, there are a number of other things that you will need to report to us as you expend those funds. But first, you will have to give us a contact name, a contact address, city, state, and zip code, email address, telephone number, and extension of the construction contact for your institution. You will need to give us the purpose and rationale for this expenditure of funds. And if the place of performing the construction is different than your location, you will also need to give us the address of the location that the construction is taking place, as well as the congressional district, the state representative district, and the Senate district for that, where that construction project is going on. Next slide. For subrecipients, subrecipients are also required to provide a DUNS number. They will also need to register with CCR. They'll be given a sub-award number that will be included in their report, as well as the representative district numbers, both congressional, state, and senatorial. The amount of the sub-award needs to be reported, as well as the sub-award funds dispersed. You'll need to report the date of the sub-award, as well as the recipient's demographic information that's required on every individual. Lastly, let me get into let me talk about the vendor payments. And here we're talking about vendor payments that are cumulative greater than $25,000. And that for this first quarter, that would mean any vendor that you pay $25,000 during the quarter. For those vendors, one of the preferred method of reporting is to provide the DUNS number of the vendor. We have received some information that if you do not have the DUNS number, there's an alternative reporting, which is to get the vendor's name, and their zip code, what product or service you purchased, and what the payment amount is. So as Dan said earlier, and Mark reiterated that these are federal dollars, that even though these are formula funds and incentive funds that you have received in the past, the reporting requirements as well as the other parts of this process will be different than if it was general revenue. And with that, I think we're going to move into the monitoring audit activity part of the agenda.
Are we going to just turn it straight over to you?
I think we're going to let Susan Warren address those.
I believe that means we are on slide 12. I wanted to just give a little background on all the different audit activity that's going on related to ARRA funds, including the GSF funds. As you can see on the slide, obviously the Coordinating Board Internal Audit and the Coordinating Board itself will be involved in doing the desk reviews and monitoring it needs to do to run this program. But in addition to that, there's going to be a lot of external, what's referred to as external auditing going on. Two of the biggest external ones on here you'll see are bullets of the GAO and, of course, the Inspector General Office, Department of Ed. Basically, if you don't already know, GAO has picked Texas as one of the Sweet 16 states that they visit on a bi-monthly basis. They have the option to visit anybody who received ARRA funds, including the coordinating board or any of the universities. So you just need to be aware of that. They can come unannounced or they can give you forewarning, but it is their option to do that as they so choose. And they sometimes don't really give you any warning. That's what they're here for. So that's their job. Of course, the Department of Ed, Inspector General, has already been to the coordinating board to do a pre-audit and more than likely will be back. And they also have the right to come down and visit the universities. So I know a lot of you have them on site already for other funds that you receive, so you should be used to that process, but they do have the right to do that. And then at the state level, you obviously have the statewide CAFR and A133 audits that occur every year. The Comptroller's Office, the Post-Payment Group is doing ARRA audits, and of course the State Auditor's Office is also doing performance-type-based audits on ARRA. So there are a lot of different groups coming out to audit the ARRA funds because of the increased transparency and requirements of the grants. I would like to speak just a little bit more on the statewide A133 audit because that was actually one that I can tell you a little bit more about because it is a little bit more defined. The others are fluid moving plans, but the state A133 audit is fairly defined. This program will be a major program for 2010 just because of the dollars involved, the fact that it's a new program, and it will be high risk. So what that means is it will be audited in fiscal year 2010. That's a given. That won't change. So everything that the coordinating board has told you about adequate documentation, doing things the right way, obviously is of high importance from an audit perspective. Because the way these funds are flowing, as you can see through all the different universities, some state agencies, some of it back to TEA, it's going to be, well, I'll just say a coordinating effort from logistics perspective to audit the funds. Because just like we do when we visit your institutions, we're going to have to stratify the costs that have been incurred, get supporting documentation, whether it's T&E records, invoices, vendors, whatever, and do that work. In addition to that, the 1512 report will be scoped into the A133 audit in 2010. OMB has already said that. So not only will we be doing the regular A133 audit that you're used to having, where you're looking at allowable costs, but the 1512 reporting that you're putting back up to the coordinating board for them to file the quarterly reports will also be subject to audit in 2010. So that's just a little perspective on what's to come from the audit world.
Okay, I think we've come to the question and answer part of our webinar. Again, you can continue to submit your questions as we move through the questions we have now, and also after today you can continue to submit them and we will answer them. First of all, will institutions receiving incentive funding be required to submit plans similar to formula replacement funding? Is the application all that is required for incentive funds?
I'll take that one. The incentive funds for fiscal year 2010 and 11 were appropriated to the coordinating board in Article 3. And so the coordinating board will be submitting a plan to the LBB and the governor's office for the September 30th deadline. The application, there will be a requirement for an application for incentive funds, and it'll be combined, or can be combined, into one application with the formula funds and any Section 25 projects that any of the general academic institutions are receiving. Let me see if all that will be required for the incentive funds, my understanding is that you will be, as I said, you'll be submitting an application and you will be reporting to us the expenditure of those funds on a monthly basis, and the incentive funds that you'll be awarded in the award will be dispersed on a cost reimbursed basis. That's for 2010. And then again in 2011, since Article 3 split incentive funding between 2 years. In September 2009 or 10, there will be a new calculation of incentive funds based on the 2009 graduates, and we anticipate that being ready for award in September 2010.
Okay. The next question, must the ARRA-funded incentive funds be expended by 8/31/2010, or can they be carried forward to fiscal year 2011? Gary, I think you...
The answer is yes.
Let me have that. I think the answer is yes. Yes. They were appropriated in fiscal year 2010, but they are able to be carried over until 2011 as the second year of the biennium. My understanding is that they would need to be spent in the biennium. Is that a consensus here?
Yes.
I think so. So the deadline for expending would be August 31, 2011.
Okay. Question, explain registering with CCR.
I've never done it, so somebody else.
Susan, you might be the best person to answer that one.
I'm just looking for a person. Actually, it's a very simple process. We can put the link out on our website for the CCR website, and it's really a fairly simple process to just walk through those steps. What we can do is, like I said, we'll put the link out there. I'll walk through it again and maybe put kind of a step-by-step for you, but I think it's fairly self-explanatory once you get to the site.
Okay.
I'm sorry, does the comptroller have that kind of information on your website?
No, we don't. Just the documentation that I've seen from federal reporting.gov, and it kind of talks a little bit about that, and it does encourage folks to go through that process pretty quickly, because especially if they're going to register as a reporter, that process needs to be in place by then.
And I will say, I think it requires your DUNS number, so if you don't have a DUNS number, you'll want to apply for your DUNS number first, and then you can register with the CCR after you have your DUNS number.
And you can do all of that ahead of October 1st. You can do that anytime. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So don't delay.
The next question, will the notice of grant award be issued as approved, or will they all be sent out after the November 30th review period?
So I get to do the first issue is approved. The way we're currently structured within the coordinating board, our coordinating board actually has to meet, and at the very least, they have to approve a budget adjustment for these funds. Right now, the coordinating board is scheduled to meet on October the 29th. At this point, I would call a hard date of you won't get a NOGA until after the coordinating board meets on the 29th. We're exploring some opportunities perhaps to move that date up, but you should not plan on that happening. Do you want to read the next one?
Next question, what will trigger cost reimbursement, monthly report, or some other billing?
Triggered it? I'm not sure.
The cost reimbursement, it's our plan that the monthly report would trigger the reimbursement process, correct?
Right. Within the packet, there will be a fiscal reimbursement form that'll have the required documentation that we would expect for the reimbursement process.
We don't necessarily we don't want to get in the business of having a daily reimbursement for these funds. We're trying to streamline processes to fit within the quarterly reporting, to fit within monthly reporting, and we're trying to really get folks to just fit into that reporting structure that we're setting up. Is that a fair statement? Good enough?
Yeah.
You can read the third one because it's about... third one.
If I could, I may defer to Rob on this one. Rob, this is the question that we're getting that I know y'all sent out, the CPA's office sent out specific instructions on the ACH, RTI. Are you prepared to kind of talk through that a little bit?
so.
If you're not, I know we've got emails that we can send out or put on the web, so I'm going to put Rob on the spot.
It's my understanding, certainly with the higher education agencies, some questions regarding whether the ARRA funds that might be passed through from the coordinating board may be held in your local accounts, or must they be required in Fund 369? Is that generally the issue we're talking
that seems to
about?
be
That's the question, I think.
The coordinating board, when they draw those funds down from the federal government, will receive those into the state treasury in USAS, and will deposit those into Fund 369. Upon their reimbursement process, RTIs have been established that will allow that transfer of funds to remain in the state treasury if an institution desires that, or if they desire to have those funds received into their local accounts, there's an RTI specific for that. So that will be one of the items that the coordinating board will need to know from each entity on where they want those funds transferred. And then once they're into their local accounts, certainly all the Recovery Act rules apply of separate accounting and tracking and reporting, to ensure that those are separated out.
Thank you, Rob.
Okay. Rob, question is Lamar State College Orange also exempt from reporting to the comptroller?
They currently exempt from reporting to me. If it's related to the GSF funding that we're talking about today, the comptroller does have a weekly reporting requirement in place. We do want these allocations that are noted for the incentive funding, for the formula funding, and for any of those special items in Section 25 to be included in their weekly reporting. So if they're getting a portion related to that, we do expect an entry into our weekly reporting. Now, one of the comments that was made about the fact that you will accept one application for all of those funds, to be consistent with that and to help the agencies out, we'll allow one entry in our weekly reporting data for all of those as well, especially since one award, as I understand it, will be granted for the bulk of those funds.
Next question, I think this might be for Rob also. What version or versions of the OMB 1512 template will be used or accepted by the comptroller or the CB? There have been several recent versions.
Latest version.
Whatever the latest version.
I do understand that if you go to federalreporting.gov, on their main page on the left-hand side, there's an option to download the Excel or XML format. If you need to download the file from that facility. It has been updated as of last week. Looking at it, it appears that the updates have not really been to the structure, at least from the Excel side of the equation. The updates have been to some of the drop-down menus that are available for, like the program source list and the awarding agency information. I believe only one field had reduced the byte size, but that file should be the one. I believe when you download it on the first page, it will indicate that it's version 1.3. So if you go to potentially recovery.gov or maybe even the OMB website and there's a link, make sure it goes to the federalreporting.gov. That is the one Excel file that you want to use.
The next question, what documentation will the coordinating board require with reimbursement requests, copies of vouchers, etc.?
Yes.
With your application, you're going to submit a detailed budget, and for the reimbursement of those, we're going to try to do that on a summary basis. We'll have a form that we're attaching with the award notice that'll give you the appropriate form that you'll need to submit back for your reimbursements. But what that'll entail is that we will require we'll be doing more desk reviews at the transaction level, but for your specific reimbursement, we're going to try to do it on a summary basis.
Okay. Give examples of plans for using ARRA funds at community colleges.
I guess our letter that went out to the presidents and chancellors stated it the best, and that is that the formula funds that the community colleges are receiving are being financed or funded with ARRA funds, but we feel like that the Article 3 provisions dealing with the expenditure of formula funds would also apply to these appropriations. So I would refer you to the riders that are in the public community college section of the appropriation bill, which states that you should spend these funds on instructional activities, student service activities, academic support activities, anything that's allowed for the expenditure of formula funds that are GR formula funds should qualify for expenditure of the ARRA funds.
Okay. Question. If we use the funding to retain faculty, will we need to submit specific faculty names for reimbursement?
Until we get the time effort piece figured out, I'm going to have to refrain from answering specifically what we're going to need for that reimbursement, but I will tell you that it's keenly on our radar, and we are working to get some resolution on that.
Next question. Is there a CFDA number for these funds? The answer is yes, but I don't have it up here with you today.
CFDA number is 84.397A. No A? 84.397, you're right. The A was in the award notice.
Okay, question. Do fringe benefits on salaries have to follow the salaries for these funds? That is, will we have to include fringe benefits in the applications and payments?
I believe there's been some, on the comptroller's website, there's been one of their FAQs was on the fringe benefits that had been appropriated by general revenue. So, Rob, do you want to speak to that?
Right. We do have on the comptroller's website in the fiscal management area some FAQs that we've put up, and one of the sections related to this particular question is in the appropriation control section, and the question being asked related to that is, will institutions have to pay benefits from ARRA funds, and how will this activity be reported on the benefit proportional by fund report, which is APS 11. The information that we have is that for those agencies receiving funding in Article 12 as a dollar-for-dollar replacement of the GR, related benefit costs will be charged to their GR benefit appropriation. As such, costs were already taken into account in the GR appropriation for the home article, being Article 3 for the higher education agencies. Those costs, as it relates to that APS 11 document, will be shown as excluded in the Section 2 of that report. However, there is one exception, and it's related to those funds appropriated in Article 12 that were to expand or create a new program, such as those identified in Section 25. It was not known if those were going to have salary-related costs associated with them. If they are, those benefit costs, they will be required to use their ARRA funds to cover those benefit costs. So, and again, that information is covered in a FAQ posted on our Comptroller website.
Next question. Can the Governmental Services Fund be used for a research project which would also create or retain jobs?
I'm not sure.
We'll have to research that one and get back.
We'll look into that one. Whoever submitted this question may want to add a little bit more detail in a subsequent email. But we'll get that answer for you. Next question. With respect to incentive funds expenditure deadline of 8/31/2011, does the definition of expended include binding encumbrances?
They would have to be expended by 8/31/2011. And by expended, I mean expended.
They have, I think it goes back to we're doing a cost reimbursement, and so that means the costs have to be dispersed so that we can reimburse a disbursement. So I think it would have to be, actually dispersed by the agency or institution.
Yes.
Short answer is no. It cannot be a binding. It has to be expended.
That's correct.
We currently have 3 DUNS numbers, one for research services, one for student aid, and one for student accounting. Do we need an additional DUNS number for ARRA funds?
I think we'll have to get back on that.
We'll have to get back to you on this one. I'm not certain. Next question. We originally were told this could be for support costs that are not creating new jobs or retaining jobs, since this is just replacing GR. Can we pay salaries without classifying them as created or retained?
I think that's entirely possible that you will have, if you decide to use these funds for salary dollars, that it will not be a creation or a retention of a job.
So the answer is yes.
Yes.
Can we pay salaries without classifying them as created or retained?
I would say yes.
Here,
In fact, if you don't have documentation that you did create or retain a job, you wouldn't want to report it as retained or created if you cannot document that for auditor review.
Can I say something real quick?
Sure.
So this webinar is recorded, correct? And we're going to make it available, so if you have a question that's come through and you want to clarify the answer that you've been given, you can always go back to the ARRA website and re-listen to it again. So just as a point of information. Sorry.
Next question. With the application process in place, do we still need to submit a plan for expenditure of the funds with the LBB and the governor by September 30th, 2009? And the answer to that question is yes. It's required in Article 12, Section 5. Next question. Does the incentive funds portion of the GSA ARRA funds need to be included in the September 30th plan that is submitted to the governor and the LBB? If yes, should already submitted plans be resubmitted to the governor and the LBB?
My understanding is that no, you do not have to revise your plan that you submitted to the LBB to include the incentive funding. And I think we said earlier, the coordinating board, since it was in our appropriation bill, will be submitting a plan to the LBB and governor's office.
What is the distinction between the State Fiscal Stabilization Fund and the Governmental Services Fund? Rob, can you give a concise definition of that?
Well, I'll try. The State Fiscal Stabilization Fund actually has two portions to it. One is the Education Services Fund, I believe, and that is 82%, I believe, of the total state fiscal stabilization money. The other 18%, I'm rounding a little bit, is the Government Services Fund. So there's one state fiscal stabilization fund, but it's got two portions to it, and the portion, of course, we're dealing with here is the Government Services Fund, the 18%.
Okay, there is a question I don't think we can answer. We'll probably have to get an answer from the governor's office, or maybe the submitter will. Can you speak to how the $10 million of administrative cost will be allocated? That $10 million is going to the governor's office, and like I said, we don't know how it's going to be allocated yet.
But we will know.
Okay, next question. If the coordinating board will not issue the notice of grant award prior to October 29, can any expenditure be incurred before this date?
You can always expend, however, you won't get reimbursed for your expenditure until after the grant award date, after the NOGA is issued. Any further,
Susan, do
you want to say something
I'll
to
offer
that?
an audit clarification on that one. Since, I can't remember which one of you said that the 930 Section 1512 report was going to have zeros in it. No expenses should be at all incurred with this money before October 1st, because if you're trying to get money back for something in September, which is in the fiscal year 2010, then that means your report shouldn't have zeros. So I would say that there's a definite lot day in the sand of October 1st on that, or you'd have to file a 1512 report, which you're currently not planning to do. So there should be no expenses incurred before October 1st, which you expect to be reimbursed from this money with.
And I think the coordinating board's position on that is we want an opportunity to look at the applications and review the expenditures before we would commit to reimburse those expenditures. And so with that, we're saying that we're not going to reimburse any expenditures prior to the GAN or the NOGA or the grant award anyway.
From the coordinating board.
That's correct.
Right.
And of course, the second biggest piece of that is making sure we get Department of Ed to clarify the documentation needed for T&E. So
correct.
that'll also drive, if I know a lot of the schools are planning to use it for salary cost. So let's say you use it for your 10-15 salary run, but then Department of Ed comes out on the 20th and tells you what the documentation is. You may not be able to get the 10-15 reimbursed if that documentation doesn't exist. Because generally on T&E, you can't go back and put that documentation in place. You have to have it in place before you incur that payroll cost. So there are some issues here with logistics that we're waiting on Department of Ed to provide guidance on.
Next question, can stimulus or ARRA funding be used for scholarships and graduate assistantships? Of course, we're just going to answer this for the Governmental Services Fund.
I think the only question I had that still I have not gotten an answer on is whether that constitutes a subaward to an individual, because I don't believe students could be classified as vendors. And so that would be my concern about using these funds for awards of financial aid to students, is that you may have a reporting nightmare with reporting subawards on students that receive financial aid. But I don't, as far as allowable cost, I don't think there's a question about student grants or student aid or stipends being a allowable cost under federal guidelines.
So we need to get back.
We do. I think I said that earlier. We do need to find out whether or not that would be an award to an individual, And if it is, then what we could inform the institutions as to what type of reporting would be required on that award.
The next question, this is a little bit more detail for the research project question that was asked. Can this fund be used to create a research program that would create jobs, faculty, engineers, postdocs, etc., and also employ students? Expenses would include equipments, supplies, and salaries.
I think one of the things, I guess, is if it's a research project that could be funded with general revenue, and we're just substituting general revenue for federal funds, then I would say, yes, you could fund this research program with federal dollars if it's something that would have qualified for expenditure of general revenue, either through incentive performance funds or formula funds.
And I guess just within the context of the questions, essentially these are formula funding, incentive funding. This type of question really should be more geared towards your institution and asking the questions about how they intend to spend formula funding. I don't think the coordinating board is going to pick research projects on an institution basis. We're expecting to fund an amount of money for formula funding. I get the impression that this is too far down into the weeds, to borrow an old phrase. You might want to contact your business officer to make sure you're being consistent with what the expenditures are for your particular institution. But we'll look into it further.
Next question, can ARRA funds be spent on utilities?
I think it's the same answer. If you would spend formula funds on utilities, if it's not, and I would have to know, you'd have to look at what facilities you're paying utilities on, because, of course, the state does not want you to spend formula funds on auxiliary buildings. So that is not an education general expense if you're paying utilities for an auxiliary, a building that's used exclusively for auxiliary enterprises or intercollegiate athletics.
Next question. If we are paying salaries with these funds but not showing jobs created or retained, do we have to provide time and effort reporting?
Yes, I mean, as a federal award, it's going to follow the OMB circulars, and that's where the time effort reporting requirement, comes from. So, yes.
Next question. Can we just send in the plan previously submitted to the LBB, which, if not rejected in 15 days, was supposed to mean it was approved? Can the coordinating board deny a plan that was previously approved?
We would hope that doesn't happen. My understanding from the LBB is that they're going to be reviewing the plans to make sure that the plans that are submitted to them have enough information for them to determine whether they would be an allowable cost for both state and federal guidelines. So hopefully their review and our review will agree.
I think it'd probably be appropriate to think of the reports, and I hope I don't offend anybody, that the LBB Governor's Office we're going to call them ARRA Light. They're not nearly as detailed as you're going to need to complete the application. So again, we're looking for consistency, but the information that's going to the LBB and the Governor's Office will only get you part of the way there. The rest of the application for the ARRA funds with the coordinating board will get you all the way there.
And then I think our goal is not necessarily to reject an application, but to work with you to the point that we could make that award.
Okay, we kind of danced around this one, Dan, but will there be a content program approval process for the coordinating board different from what the LBB already did?
Yes.
Don't dance on it, just.
Yes, that's it. What action would an institution need to take if their report to the THECB, LBB, and Governor's Office due on 9/30 identifies a spending strategy that is different from the application due on 10/31/08, our application?
Shame on us. I think we've kind of talked about in and around and through the LBB and the Governor's Office is due on the 30th. That process is ongoing. We're not circumventing that process. We're augmenting that process to get to the point where we can make a grant award. We certainly hope that you're consistent and you're reporting to all of the state entities. If we get your application and you've attached your report that you submitted to the governor's office in LBB and there's inconsistencies or there's a complete disconnect, we'll certainly contact you and work through those issues before any kind of a grant award would be made from the coordinating board. Is that good enough?
I think that's good. I have not heard, and as far as what is submitted, the LBB and the Governor's Office, we could work with them to let them know that the application is a little bit different than what they received, and
I think it's important. I'm sorry.
If it's okay with them, I think we could. If they want a revised submittal, I think they'll be asking and announcing those themselves.
I think it's important for our audience to understand that a lot has changed since June, when I think the original appropriation was made. Many months have gone by. The levels of responsibility have changed dramatically since that time. We're trying to make sure that we fit all the pieces into the right places. I don't know, Rob, if you want to make any kind of a broad stroke statement about the report that's going to the governor's office in LBB. Seems like that's a common question that's been coming up.
You're right. When the appropriations bill was passed in May and signed in June, it was what we knew. We've moved on the road some, with the coordinating board being designated as the prime recipient of these funds, and so I think the expectation is that the information. There's a lot of eyes on these dollars at the legislative level, and thus the requirements for these plans to come in there. So I think being as informative as you can, and the information you provide to the oversight agencies as well as to the coordinating board, will just help everyone's case as far as documentation and moving forward.
Okay. Susan, I think this is in regard to your comment on expenditures before October 1st. Must institutions wait to begin expending until after receipt of the notice of grant award?
Yes. The
answer to that question is yes.
We won't identify who sent that in, by the way.
Okay, this is a related question. Assuming the notice of grant awards will not be dated prior to 10/1, why can't the notice of grant awards award pre-award costs back to September 1st, 2009? This pre-award concept is common with other Department of Education awards we receive through the Texas Education Agency.
Go ahead, I'll let you take your part of it there if you want. Thank you, Susan.
The primary reason for that is the coordinating board has basically made an executive decision to file a 930 Section 1512 report with zeros. So if you're going to have zeros in the report going to the recovery.gov, that means you can't go back into September and reimburse for those costs.
Okay, this is a rather lengthy question. This involves the LBB, the report to the LBB and the Governor's Office by September 30th. It says, and they're quoting House Bill 4586, Section 34, unless the LBB and the Governor issue a written disapproval of proposed expenditures under the plan within 15 business days after September 30th, the agency or institution may expend the funds in accordance with the plan, subject to Section 30 of this Act. Per our calculation, that means that the LBB and the Governor's Office have until October 22nd, or 15 business days after September 30th, to issue written disapproval. Is that correct? And likewise, is it also correct that entities should not spend any ARRA monies until at least October 23rd? Of course, we can't answer a question for the LBB and the Governor's Office.
I think it's most important for folks listening in today is that we're trying, the critical date from the coordinating board's perspective is the date that the notice of grant award goes out. And we're trying to get everything as expeditiously as possible. And I know that there's a heightened sense of urgency to spend this money before it goes away. Rest assured that these funds are available, and they're going to be available for the next 2 years. Susan, do you want to chime in? It looks like you're ready to speak.
Well, I think from a layman sitting on the side over here, I think the way I'm looking at this is the requirement from the LBB and the Governor is a state requirement. It is a state, it was in Article, 12, okay, it's a state requirement, you have to fulfill that responsibility. That does not equate to federal requirements. The coordinating board has been charged with federal requirements. They are different. The federal requirements are much more detailed, more involved, and actually are much more in number than the state requirements. So I would expect these to be different levels of detail, and they're not going to align 100%. So that is the way I'm looking at this as an auditor perspective. It's very simplified, I understand that. I'm not trying to offend anybody. But that would be a way to draw the difference between the two, is one is a state requirement, the other is a federal requirement.
Thank you.
Next question. The OMB circulars prohibit supplanting. Does this apply to ARRA funds?
That is actually a very good question. It is an outstanding question with Department of Ed, along with the time and effort issue. KPMG has taken that question to Department of Ed, and we do not have any answer for that at this time. When we get an answer, I will definitely share it with the coordinating board, and likewise, I'm sure they will share it with you.
Next question. What date will the cutoff for applications to ensure review and approval of the award at the October 29th THECB meeting? I guess, what date will the cutoff be for applications?
We said a 30 days.
30 days.
30 days from October 1.
So it's September.
October 30th.
October 30th.
Yeah. We want to clarify that the board will not be approving the applications. They approve, but
Okay.
they're under the impression.
Okay, so the scheduled board meeting on the 29th is to approve the aggregate $723 million from a budget standpoint. It's not evaluating each individual application. So there really isn't a cutoff date for the applications prior to the 29th board meeting. Those are two separate dates. So there's a 30-day window for applications irrespective of the board date. Thank you.
Okay, that is all the questions that have been submitted today.
Susan has a couple more.
Okay, so excuse me.
It's okay. One question that got I had in my way, I think, earlier this afternoon was, I don't know how many people have seen it on the webinar, but Department of Ed issued some guidance on Friday. It is on their website, and it's specifically a document about Section 1512. Gary's been speaking a lot about it today in his presentation. One of the questions I was asked to clarify from an audit perspective is Roman numeral 3.3. And I'll just read you the question because I think it's going to cause some confusion if you haven't already seen it. So let me provide perspective from an auditor's perspective. The question says, state-funded universities and other state-funded institutions of higher education, state IHEs, are considered state agencies in some states. They are in Texas. But basically, you roll up into the statewide CAFR, so you are considered part of this statewide, in their perspective, an agency. But not in other states, which is true. Should these state institutions that receive funds under the Stable Fiscal Stabilization Program, what we're talking about here today, the GSF, be regarded as subrecipients? The answer in here is yes. Now, before everybody panics, let me explain what that means. There are two different concepts here. There is the A133 O&B requirement, and then there is Section 1512. Unfortunately, they don't always align. What Department of Ed has decided, and I don't know the reason, but what they have decided for 1512 is they specifically want the GSF funds to be reported as subrecipients. So what that means to the coordinating board is they're going to file the 1512 report on behalf of all of you. They will put you on there as subs, not as direct cost. It's a logistics issue on the 1512. That will not change the way you do this for A133 on your Schedule 1A in your AFR, otherwise known as your CFA. You are still not considered a sub on that CFA. So please separate the two concepts because I can see a lot of mass confusion that's going to happen out of this. This guidance published on Friday is just for 1512 reporting. It is not for A133 reporting purposes.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah, it's going to come back up, I'm sure.
Okay, we don't have any other questions submitted to our mailbox. Is there anybody in the audience today here at the coordinating board that has any questions? All right. I know this is a lot of material all at one time. We are going to continue to update our agency website, and we also will continue to monitor the ARRA mailbox, and we will get your questions answered. Dr. Alonso would like to make some closing comments.
Thank you, Mark. First of all, I want to express my appreciation to all of my colleagues here today who have prepared and have been trying to prepare and working very hard to prepare the material in anticipation of the questions that have come in. I realize that there are still a lot of unanswered questions. I realize that there are a lot of things that are still changing, and we ask you to please bear with us as we try to sort out the requirements that seems to be coming down almost on a daily basis from the federal government, specifically the Department of Education. I also want to thank Susan Warren from KPMG and Rob Coleman from the Comptroller's Office for their insightful information and answers to the questions that you have submitted today. And last but not least, thank you to the institutions who have submitted the questions. And hopefully, if we did not answer your questions, we will get you an answer. We will post it on our website. And please ask you to continuously check that information or that site for updated information. One of the things that I'd like to reiterate from one of the comments that Dan Weaver made at the beginning of the presentation is that we are being very deliberate about the process. Not because we are stalling, not because we don't want to get the money out, not because we're dragging our feet, but simply because, as he said, we want to make sure that before we launch that spaceship, to use his analogy, we can bring it back. There is madness, but we are trying to bring some method to the madness. We are trying to get all the information out because we truly believe that it is easier to get it right and get it correct from the beginning than it would be to rush, put the money out, and then come back and have to correct many reports and many processes later on. When we learn about the coordinating board being asked to handle these funds, we made a commitment to the governor's office, and we will abide by it. I made a commitment to the commissioner. We have made a commitment to our board, and those commitments, and some of you might find this repetitive because I spoke about this briefly at the Controller's conference call about a week ago or so. Those commitments are that we will handle the funds and be in compliance. We will do, as has been mentioned before several times today, these funds are of high visibility. There are many eyes, as Susan Warren put it, that will be looking at us, will be looking at how we expend these funds, how we monitor them, how we report them, and we certainly want to make sure that we are crossing our T's and dotting our I's, as they say. We make that commitment, and we plan to abide by it. We also make the commitment that we will meet all monthly, quarterly, and otherwise reporting requirements and abide by the subrecipient monitoring requirements. I've asked staff, and we take this very seriously, that we will not add any other requirements that are not necessary. In other words, we're not looking to add anything else just for the sake of making institutions jump through the hoops. If it's not required, we're not going to add it on there. But know that if it is a requirement, whether it's state or federal, we have no choice but to meet those requirements. And lastly, but certainly not the least, our commitment is to work together with you. Our commitment is to answer your questions as fast as we can, as accurately as we can get the information from the feds. And we ask for your cooperation. We know we'll have it. We ask for your endurance, your forbearance with us. We ask that if anything's not clear, you let us know so that we can clarify it for everybody, because after all, we're in this game together. So I thank you, and we look forward to working with you over the next 2 years. Thank you.
Thank you. We will be in touch. Appreciate it.